There exists a book so ancient, so disturbing, that it was banned from the Bible, buried in desert caves, and forgotten for thousands of years. It speaks of giants, not myths, but monstrous beings of flesh and bone who once ruled the earth. It tells of fallen angels, of forbidden knowledge, and of a judgment so catastrophic that only a handful survived. It is not fantasy. It is history, erased history. And its name is the Book of Giants. What if the stories you heard as a child of Noah's Ark, of the Great Flood, were only part of the truth? What if the flood wasn't just sent to destroy wicked humanity, but to wipe out a race of hybrids, half angel, half human, who had corrupted the world beyond recognition? What if these giants, these Nephilim, were the real reason the world drowned? And what if fragments of their story still remain hidden in caves, whispered in legends, and now rediscovered in our time? But before we uncover what they never wanted you to know, take a moment right now to support this channel. Subscribe so you don't miss future episodes exposing ancient secrets. Comment below. Where are you watching from? And what time is it right now? Share this video if this mystery pulls you in, and let others know you understand the mystery behind this title. Fall asleep to the Book of Giants. Banned from the Bible. Made it, because what comes next will change how you read history forever. The Book of Giants was once part of a broader tapestry of ancient texts that painted a terrifying picture of the pre-flood world. Though it was never included in the canonical Bible, it is closely connected to the Book of Enoch, another ancient script that tells of a time when the heavens fell, not with stars but with angels. These angels, known as the Watchers, defied divine command and descended to earth. They took human wives, and from these forbidden unions came the Nephilim giants, who were never meant to exist. These were not mere tall men or warriors of legend. The Nephilim were aberrations, beings of immense size and unimaginable hunger. They devoured animals, men, even each other. They ruled with terror, built massive cities, and blasphemed the name of God. Their very existence tore a wound in the fabric of creation, and as their numbers grew, the world began to rot from the inside out. But the giants were not the origin. They were the consequence. The true beginning lies with the Watchers, those fallen angels whose lust birthed the disaster. In the Book of Giants, we hear their names: Shemihaza, Arakiel, Barakiel, and others once glorious beings who abandoned their posts to indulge in what was forbidden. These beings brought not only corrupted flesh, but corrupted knowledge. They taught humans sorcery, warfare, astrology, and the crafting of weapons and charms. Civilization advanced rapidly, but at a terrible cost. The world before the flood was not primitive. It was technologically and spiritually explosive, an age of wonders born from rebellion. And as the Nephilim grew, the balance of the world tipped into darkness. Blood filled the rivers, fire consumed the cities, and heaven watched, not idly but preparing. Fragments of the Book of Giants were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls discovered in Qumran in the 20th century. Written in Aramaic, these texts confirm what many believe to be folklore. They reveal the inner thoughts of the Nephilim, their dreams, their fears, their desperate attempts to survive. These were not mindless beasts, they were beings who knew their origin, understood their doom, and sought answers. Some of the most harrowing passages describe their dreams, visions of destruction, of being buried beneath the earth, of fire and water consuming their bodies. In panic, they send one of their own, Mahwe, to speak with Enoch, a prophet who had been taken by God and shown the fate of both angels and men. What Enoch reveals is terrifying. The giants have no hope. Their destruction has already been decreed. Their spirits will not rest. Their bodies will be crushed, and even after death, they will wander the earth as demons. This is where the Book of Giants takes us beyond Genesis. While the Bible tells us that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and that the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, it does not go further. But this book does. It shows us their conversations, their counsels, their attempts to avoid their fate. It reveals the emotional core of a race born to die. And in doing so, it forces us to ask, why was this book banned? Why was it stripped from the canon, hidden for millennia? Was it too dangerous, too honest, or perhaps too revealing? The truth is, if the Book of Giants is even partially true, then our understanding of ancient history, of the Bible, and of the spiritual war that has raged since the dawn of time must be re-evaluated. This was not just a war of men against men, but of angels against order, of bloodlines defying heaven, of secrets too dark to survive the light. And now, those secrets are returning, long before the floodwaters rose to claim the earth, before Noah built his ark, or the warnings of Enoch reached human ears. The world was already broken. It was not the paradise many imagine, but a realm teetering on the edge of collapse. The Book of Giants paints a chilling picture of this era, a time when the Nephilim roamed freely across a world that could no longer contain them. These were not isolated monstrosities. They were kings, commanders, rulers of cities carved from stone and bone, gods to the terrified humans who dared not resist. The very ground quaked beneath their feet. The sky, once a symbol of divine order, echoed with their cries of conquest. This was the Forgotten Age, a time of unnatural births and wars that cracked the spine of creation itself. The world of the Nephilim was one forged by chaos. Their fathers, the Watchers, had descended from the heavens, not as invaders but as seekers of pleasure and power. They were not sent by God. They had abandoned their posts, turning away from celestial duty and falling into flesh. What they gave the world was not light, but fire. They taught humanity the crafting of weapons, the enchantments of sorcery, the signs in the stars. They offered knowledge that corrupted rather than enlightened. And their offspring, the Nephilim, were the living proof that this union was never meant to be. Born of heaven and earth, they were too powerful for either realm to contain. They ate, they conquered, and they devoured. From their first breath, they were engines of ruin. Across ancient lands, from the valleys near Mount Hermon to the wide plains where ancient rivers flowed, the Nephilim built strongholds. They used the knowledge of the Watchers to raise towers that reached into the clouds, to dig wells that pierced the veins of the earth, to dominate every creature beneath the sun. Animals fled before them. Birds abandoned their nests. Entire ecosystems collapsed under their insatiable hunger. Cities of men became places of tribute, not resistance. Humans brought offerings in the hope that their children would not be taken, their crops not consumed. But the Nephilim could not be satisfied. Their hunger was not just of the stomach, it was woven into their essence. They consumed to fill a void that could not be filled. Their very presence poisoned the world around them. This was a world in which survival itself became a form of resistance. Ordinary men and women hid in caves, retreated into the densest forests, sought refuge on the highest cliffs, yet nowhere was safe. The giants could smell fear. They tracked movement from miles away. Some, like Gilgamesh, demanded worship and sacrifice. Others, like Ahia, needed no reason to kill beyond curiosity. The Book of Giants suggests that humanity had no hope, not because they were weak, but because the rules had changed. The laws of creation had been violated, and the result was a race of beings that answered to no one, not even the angels who had birthed them. The giants began to see themselves not just as rulers but as gods, and in their arrogance, they believed the world belonged to them alone. But there were signs, even then, that their reign would not last forever. The ground they walked began to wither, rivers dried up in their path, forests blackened where they made their camps. The sky, once clear and golden, took on a darker hue. The world itself seemed to groan under their weight. It was not simply judgment from above, it was rebellion from below. Creation was rejecting the unnatural. Nature does not long tolerate what should not exist. And as the giants spread their dominion, so too did the resistance of the earth grow. The once fertile land turned barren. Fruit withered on the vine. Beasts, once plentiful, grew scarce. The balance of the world, so delicately held since the dawn of time, was shattering. In this lost age, war became the natural state of existence, not just among the Nephilim and humanity, but among the giants themselves. As resources dwindled, alliances dissolved, former brothers turned into rivals, the strongest hunted the weakest. Massive battles erupted in valleys and across mountains, shaping the land into forms we can still trace in ancient geology. What myths remember as gods warring in the sky were often these beings clashing in the flesh. The Book of Giants tells of weapons forged from forbidden metals, of enchantments powerful enough to split mountains, of strategies that showed intelligence as terrifying as their strength. These were not dumb beasts. They were thinkers, leaders, fallen royalty of a doomed race. The Nephilim were not merely predators, they were rulers of a decaying world. Some governed cities of stone where humans lived as slaves. Others wandered as solitary titans, leaving destruction in their wake. They spoke in languages older than human memory, using words taught by angels to command elements and manipulate thought. They wore armor etched with runes. They trained in arts that would later be called witchcraft or forbidden magic. The Book of Giants is clear. Their minds were as vast as their forms, and that made them all the more dangerous. Their dreams were not of peace or wisdom, but domination and rebellion. They did not seek harmony, they sought to rise above their fate, even if it meant challenging the divine order itself. But there were cracks in the illusion of their invincibility. Some giants began to have visions, unsettling dreams of trees being felled, gardens dying, and waters rising. They could not understand them, but the fear was real. One by one, they were plagued by the sense that their time was ending. This was the prelude to judgment, the silence before the storm. The watchers who had birthed them became silent, distant, as if even they could no longer bear what their actions had brought forth. And among the humans, there were whispers of a man named Enoch, who walked with God, who knew things no one else dared speak. He would be the one they would eventually seek, but not yet. For now, the giants still ruled, and the world, broken as it was, still belonged to them. This was the world before the flood, not a paradise lost, but a nightmare sustained. A time when the laws of creation had been violated so completely that only divine intervention could reset the balance. The earth cried out, the skies darkened, and somewhere, in the celestial realms, judgment began to stir. But below, on the surface of a dying world, the giants still believed they could win. Before the world fell into chaos, before the first Nephilim drew breath, or the flood swallowed the earth, there was an oath, a terrible, ancient vow spoken beneath the stars on the peak of Mount Hermon. 200 celestial beings, angels of radiant form and power, made a pact. They would descend together, not as messengers or guardians, but as rebels. Their leader was Shemihaza, a mighty watcher, once tasked with observing humanity from afar, ensuring divine order remained intact. But watching was no longer enough. Desire grew within them, not only desire for the beauty of mortal women, but for influence, control, the thrill of creation. And so, they fell, not cast down, but by choice. The Watchers became the first rebels. Their descent not a punishment, but a decision that would unravel creation itself. In the scriptures, angels are often shown as messengers of light, warriors of God, extensions of divine justice. But the Watchers were different. They had been appointed not to intervene but to observe, to remain distant from the affairs of mankind. Their role was passive, yet their hearts betrayed them. The book of Enoch tells us they descended not merely for lust, but to share knowledge, secret knowledge. They taught forbidden arts to mankind, sorcery, enchantment, divination, warfare. They unveiled mysteries never meant for mortal minds, and in their arrogance, they believed they could improve the world. But their wisdom was tainted, not because it lacked truth, but because it lacked permission. The divine structure they defied was not flawed, it was protected. And in violating it, they unleashed consequences too vast to contain. Each of the 200 Watchers brought their own unique corruption to the earth. Azazel taught men to forge weapons, and women to adorn themselves with beauty that inflamed desire. Kokabeel revealed the secrets of the stars, once known only to heaven. Shamsiel taught enchantments. Sariel explained the courses of the moon. The list goes on. Each name a celestial being turned to shadow. They were not demons, not yet. They still retained much of their former glory, their appearance still awe-inspiring. To mortals, they were gods, and they embraced that role. The Watchers did not simply fall, they settled into their new domain like kings, and the children they fathered, the Nephilim, were intended to inherit it all. This was their plan, to reshape the world in their image, to rule as a new divine order apart from God. But power, once given, cannot be controlled. The Watchers thought they could teach their sons discipline, that the Nephilim could be guided into kingship, but they had birthed a generation whose hunger outpaced their understanding. The Nephilim did not seek wisdom, they consumed it. They did not build civilizations, they devoured them. And as the giants grew in strength, so too did their corruption. What began as pride became perversion. What began as ambition became devastation. The Watchers watched, helpless now in the face of what they had created. And worse, they began to understand that their punishment had not yet come, but it was coming. The question remains, were the Watchers evil from the beginning, or did they fall from a misguided desire to help? Some traditions suggest that their sin was not malice, but rebellion born from love, a love for humanity so intense it blinded them. They wanted to be close to us, to shape us, to walk beside us. But heaven had drawn a line they dared to cross, and once they did, their purity was stained forever. Others argue the Watchers were never noble, that their descent was driven by lust and the thirst for control, that even their so-called gifts were poison in disguise. After all, what good is knowledge if it leads to ruin? What value is wisdom that ends in death? Shemihaza, their leader, is a tragic figure in this story. Some texts say he repented too late, that after seeing the chaos his children caused, he begged God for forgiveness, but his plea was denied. His fate was sealed along with the others. He would be bound beneath the earth, a prisoner of his own choices, Others claim that his regret was false, that he wept not for what he had done, but for the punishment that awaited. Regardless of his motive, Shemi-Haza became the symbol of a failed rebellion, a reminder that even the greatest among the angels could fall. The Book of Giants gives us something more than a list of names. It paints the Watchers as conflicted beings. Some continued teaching their sons. Others retreated into silence, horrified by what they had made. Barakil, the father of Mahwe, passed on celestial knowledge of the stars, the heavens, and the realms beyond, hoping his son might use it to understand his purpose. Yet even he could not escape the consequences. No amount of teaching could undo the truth. The Nephilim should never have existed. The Watchers' greatest sin was not simply defiling mortal women, it was distorting the created order. Their offspring were not just giants, they were contradictions, beings who belonged to no realm, who threatened both heaven and earth by their very presence. In time, heaven responded. The archangels Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, and Uriel were sent not merely to punish, but to restore balance. They descended not with wrath alone, but with sorrow, because divine judgment, though perfect, is never without grief. The Watchers were bound in chains of light, cast into darkness, imprisoned beneath mountains and oceans, not slain, but silenced. They became warnings carved in stone, and their children? They were left to suffer their fate, to learn through dreams what had already been decreed. The world would not forget the Watchers, but their names would become whispers, their stories buried, their truths feared, because in them we see the danger of ambition, the peril of unchecked desire, and the tragedy of love that dares to rewrite the laws of heaven. We remember the Watchers not just as villains, but as reflections. They are the embodiment of what happens when guardians betray their purpose, when protectors become destroyers. And their story matters not because it is old, but because it still echoes in every age when power is misused, when knowledge is abused, and when rebellion dresses itself in righteousness. Their legacy lies not only in the destruction they caused, but in the warning they left behind. For what they began with passion ended with silence, and what they hoped would be salvation became the prelude to the flood. From the forbidden union between the Watchers and the daughters of men came the birth of a new race, one not blessed by heaven nor born of mortal design. These were the Nephilim, the fallen ones, the giants who would soon cast a shadow across all the world. The Book of Giants describes their birth not as a miracle, but as a violent rupture in the fabric of creation. Their arrival was not celebrated, it was feared. The women who carried them died in agony. The births were unnatural, accelerated, catastrophic. Within days, the newborn giants grew to the size of grown men. Within weeks, they towered above their fathers. There was no innocence in their infancy. From their very first breath, they devoured. They dominated. They terrified. The earliest of these beings were monstrous in both form and appetite. Their names were whispered in fear: Oya and Haya, twin sons of Shemi-Haza, were said to be so large that their heads disappeared into the clouds. Their voices shattered stone, their steps left craters, and their hunger knew no end. The texts describe them not simply as large men, but as elemental forces, beings whose presence twisted the land and the air. Crops failed in their shadow, rivers turned bitter where they drank, the skies dimmed above their domains. They were not kings. They were catastrophes with crowns. The Nephilim were not a single type. Their nature shifted depending on the angel who fathered them. Some, like Mahwe, the son of Barakil, were born with keen minds and speed that blurred the eye. Mahwe was different, though still a giant. He was contemplative, quiet, driven by questions rather than conquest. His father had been one of the celestial astronomers, and in Mahwe there lingered a remnant of stargazing wisdom. Others were creatures of raw destruction. Habish, whose strength was unmatched, was said to uproot mountains for sport. Ahia, known for his cruelty, was feared even among giants for the way he relished in pain. These beings had different faces, but the same root, a union that never should have occurred. What the Watchers gave their children was not only size but knowledge. They taught them to harness the elements, to command spirits, to wage war with intelligence and sorcery. They were groomed to rule, but their growth outpaced their instruction. The giants soon grew beyond their teachers, not in wisdom, but in arrogance. They stopped listening. They started building. Monuments of impossible scale rose under their hands. Fortresses carved into the bones of mountains. Thrones of metal no human could lift. Cities made for feet hundreds of feet wide. They were not content to live among men. They intended to rule them, reshape them, or destroy them. But their hunger ruined everything. The land could not feed them. At first, they consumed flocks, then fields, then entire regions. When animals and crops could no longer sustain them, they turned on humans. The texts do not flinch here. They devoured people, first the dead, then the living. Entire villages were swallowed in a single night. What was once a realm of creation had become a world of consumption. And still, they were not satisfied. Their hunger was not natural. It was metaphysical, a symptom of the wrongness of their being. They were creatures caught between realms, and their bodies seemed to scream for resolution, for something that the world could never provide. The humans who survived during this era lived in a state of constant dread. They built walls, towers, ditches filled with fire. Nothing worked. The Nephilim tore through defenses like parchment. Some humans offered tribute: food, livestock, even children, in exchange for safety. But the giants were not gods who accepted offerings. They were predators. Feeding them only delayed the inevitable. In the shadows of their fortresses, humans became cattle, running between the cracks of what was once their own world. And yet, the giants still walked proud, still believed themselves to be invincible. In their eyes, it was not they who were unnatural, it was the world that was unworthy of them. The Book of Giants also tells us that the Nephilim were not without dreams. They began to have visions of destruction, floods, fires, gardens dying, trees falling. They saw symbols carved into stone, names fading from the memory of heaven. At first, they dismissed these dreams, but they returned, night after night. Mahwe was among the first to be troubled by them. His dreams were clearer than most. He saw waters rising, not just around him, but through him. He began to believe that the dreams were warnings. But to who? And from where? Were they curses, messages, or something worse, a prophecy of justice they could not escape? This is what made the Nephilim different from beasts. They were aware. They feared. Some of them tried to understand. They gathered in councils, sent messengers, debated the meanings of their dreams. Mahwe was eventually chosen to journey to the prophet Enoch, not for conquest but for answers. It was a desperate act, and perhaps the only one that showed the sliver of a soul left in these creatures, because deep within them there was a terrible knowledge. They were never meant to live, and the world around them was proof. The births of the Nephilim did not represent a new chapter in humanity's story. They marked the closing of the book. From the moment they emerged, creation began to unravel. The balance tilted. The harmony between heaven, earth, and mankind was broken. Every breath they took was a scream against the divine structure. And though they built mighty kingdoms, though they roared across mountains and claimed dominion over the weak, their fate had already been decided. The flood had not yet come, but it had already been spoken, because when something exists outside of design, the very act of its survival becomes a defiance. And in the eyes of heaven, defiance could only end one way. So the giants grew. They ruled. They burned. They dreamed. But the ground beneath them was already cracking. Their fathers could not save them. Their might could not protect them. The sky was watching, and judgment had already begun to gather like clouds in the distance. Among the names whispered in the fragments of the Book of Giants, one echoes louder than most: Gilgamesh. In Mesopotamian tradition, he is hailed as a demigod, a king of Uruk, a seeker of immortality. His tale, inscribed on clay tablets thousands of years old, is one of the earliest known epics in human history. But in the Book of Giants, Gilgamesh is remembered differently, not as a hero, but as a Nephilim, a being born of a fallen angel and a mortal woman, towering in size and ambition. This contradiction between cultural reverence and apocryphal fear invites a chilling question. Was Gilgamesh a savior of his people, or a destroyer of worlds? In the Epic of Gilgamesh, he is 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, blessed with unmatched strength, unmatched arrogance, and a restless spirit. He oppresses his people, then seeks wisdom from the gods. He kills monsters, mourns his companion Enkidu, and searches for eternal life. His story ends in humility, a man who, after witnessing death and loss, returns to his city with newfound understanding. But the Book of Giants paints a far darker portrait. Here, Gilgamesh is not a conflicted hero. He is a conqueror who sought to build a kingdom that would rival the heavens. He is not humbled by death. He is hunted by prophecy. His cities are not symbols of human progress, but fortresses of defiance against divine will. The dual identity of Gilgamesh raises unsettling implications. Could the ancient Mesopotamians have deified a Nephilim? Could the mighty king, worshipped in temples and carved into stone, have once been one of the doomed offspring of the Watchers? The Book of Giants suggests that he was not merely a figure of legend, but a remnant of a race erased by the flood. He lived before the deluge. His power came not from mortal lineage, but from corrupted celestial blood. His empire was not celebrated in heaven, it was targeted for destruction. According to the Book of Giants, Gilgamesh stood among the greatest of the Nephilim. His size alone made him a terror. His voice cracked mountains. His footsteps changed the course of rivers. But it was not brute force that made him dangerous. It was vision. He was a strategist, a builder, a dreamer of impossible dreams. He sought not just to rule humanity, but to command the elements. Under his leadership, other giants rallied. They constructed cities using technologies inherited from their angelic fathers, tools that could shape stone with thought, lights that burned without fire, weapons forged from metals unknown to mankind. But Gilgamesh was never satisfied. In his dreams, he saw a throne beyond the stars. In his visions, he believed he could ascend to godhood, not through worship, but through conquest. His challenge was not against men, it was against the order of creation. His ambitions were cosmic, and in that ambition, he became the very embodiment of the sin that birthed the Nephilim, to blur the boundary between heaven and earth, between mortal and divine, between creature and creator. There is a powerful moment preserved in fragmentary lines where Gilgamesh, upon hearing of the coming flood, does not tremble, he roars. He refuses to submit. He vows to fight the will of heaven itself. And yet, he dreams, Like the others, he is haunted by visions. He sees his great cities reduced to ash. He sees water rising over his temples. He sees the faces of the people he once ruled, drowned in silence. Unlike Mahwe, who seeks understanding, or Oya and Haya, who turn to war, Gilgamesh sinks into rage. He does not seek answers. He prepares for battle. In the later tablets of his Mesopotamian epic, Gilgamesh journeys to find Utnapishtim, the survivor of the flood, to uncover the secret of eternal life. He is told he cannot have it. He returns home, broken but wiser. But this version of the story comes after the biblical flood. Could it be that the legend we know is the sanitized memory of a deeper, darker truth? That Gilgamesh did not survive to rule wisely, but died among the other Nephilim, his spirit condemned to wander. The Book of Giants offers a chilling possibility, that the historical Gilgamesh was one of the last to fall, still fighting, still defiant, as the waters swallowed his empire. There are tantalizing parallels between the Epic of Gilgamesh and the biblical flood narrative. Both involve a great deluge sent by the gods to wipe out corrupted humanity. Both feature a lone survivor who builds a boat. Both echo with themes of mortality, divine judgment, and forbidden knowledge. But the Book of Giants bridges a gap between them. It reveals the beings who caused the flood, not just wicked humans, but the Nephilim, and among them, Gilgamesh. The flood was not an arbitrary punishment. It was a cleansing, and Gilgamesh was one of the stains to be washed away. Even after the waters receded, his name endured. Across cultures, the myth of the giant king survived. He was remembered as a wise ruler, a fearless warrior, a seeker of truth. But beneath that myth may lie the bones of a fallen demigod. The Book of Giants does not mourn him. It does not celebrate him. It warns of him. It remembers him not as a hero, but as a caution, a being who could have done good, but chose ambition instead. And that, perhaps, is the tragedy. Gilgamesh was not the worst of the Nephilim. He may have even believed he was doing what was right. But in a world built on stolen divinity, even the best intentions can lead to ruin. To see Gilgamesh clearly is to see both greatness and madness, strength and sorrow. He was a king. He was a monster. He was a giant who reached for the stars and drowned beneath them. His story did not end with a tablet or a temple. It ends in the fragments of a forbidden book, buried in the desert for 2,000 years, waiting to speak once more. In the early days, the Nephilim consumed as any living creature might fields of grain, vast herds of animals, rivers of fresh water. But it quickly became clear that the world was not enough. The Book of Giants describes a rapid and terrifying escalation. What began as gluttony became destruction. What began as consumption became desecration. Crops vanished in hours. Entire forests flattened by giant hands reaching for fruit that would not satisfy. Herds of cattle, once numbering in the thousands, were devoured in a single meal. The giants were not merely hungry, they were cursed with an appetite that defied reason. A spiritual hunger as deep as the abyss from which their lineage sprang. It was not long before the world began to fight back, not through violence, but through exhaustion. The land turned barren. The rain stopped. The skies burned with unnatural heat. The forests retreated. The rivers thinned to cracked streambeds. Birds vanished. The wild beasts were hunted to the brink of extinction. Humanity, once scattered and humble, began to huddle in desperate silence, hiding what little food they had from the towering predators that ruled the earth. At first, they offered tribute, sacks of grain, baskets of fish, even their livestock. But the giants demanded more, always more, and soon they demanded what no offering should ever contain human life. The fragments do not disguise what happened next. They describe it plainly, as though the horror needed no poetry. The Nephilim began to eat flesh, not just the dead, but the living. They raided villages and cities, tearing apart walls, pulling people from their homes, devouring them in front of their families. The screams of the victims echoed through valleys and burned into the memory of those who survived. Children were stolen, mothers were ripped from cradles, fathers were dragged through fields and swallowed whole. The giants feasted on what was never theirs to take. Humanity's worst nightmares had become reality. And still, the hunger persisted. The Book of Giants speaks of a line that was crossed, an irreversible corruption. And they began to sin against birds, and against beasts, and against reptiles and fish. And they devoured one another's flesh and drank the blood. This was not a metaphor. It was the moment when the Nephilim turned on themselves, when even their own kind could not escape the gnawing void inside them. Brothers consumed brothers. Alliances fractured in an instant. Those once united by lineage tore each other apart in the dirt. Bones splintering, blood staining the ground. The world was not just dying, it was being unmade. In one account, a Nephilim named Hobabish, driven mad by starvation, killed his own brother in the night and ate his heart raw. Another passage describes an unnamed giant being cornered by his kin and divided like an animal at slaughter. His flesh shared among them without ceremony. There was no more dignity among the Nephilim, no more order, only the law of the strongest and the desperation of the damned. They had become what their fathers never intended, monsters in every sense. Not rulers, not sons, not inheritors of celestial knowledge, but abominations in revolt against creation itself. Humanity, what remained of it, retreated into shadows. The caves became sanctuaries, mountains became hiding places, fires were extinguished to avoid drawing the gaze of passing giants. Food was hoarded in silence. Songs were replaced with sobbing. The old stories, passed down from ancestors, were rewritten in blood and grief. Mothers told their children of the time before the giants, when the world had been green, when the stars had felt like guardians instead of silent witnesses to horror. But those memories were fading. A generation was being raised that had never known peace. Only the tremble of the ground, only the fear that every noise in the night might be the last. And yet, as bleak as the world became, the Nephilim still believed they would prevail. Even in cannibalism, they clung to the delusion of strength. The strongest among them began to claim dominion over the others. Factions formed, tribes of terror, led by the fiercest killers. Some saw the slaughter as necessary, a culling of the weak to preserve the powerful. Others claimed they were evolving, adapting to the scarcity, becoming gods through the survival of the fittest. But all of it was delusion. The hunger was not fading, it was growing, and no matter how much they consumed, the giants could not silence the gnawing emptiness within them. This hunger was not merely physical, it was spiritual. The very nature of the Nephilim was wrong. Their bodies had been stitched from divine and human essence in a pattern never meant to exist. They were cursed from conception. Their hunger was the consequence of that curse, a constant reminder that they were not supposed to be. They were creatures of contradiction, and the contradiction demanded more. In the wake of their appetites, the earth withered, and in their wake, the skies wept. The Book of Giants hints that even the stars dimmed their light in mourning for the world that was slipping away. The humans began to pray. In the deepest caverns, in silence, broken only by breath and tears, They lifted their voices toward heaven. They cried not just for deliverance, but for justice. They begged for an end, and their prayers were not ignored. In the celestial realms, 4 great archangels, Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, and Uriel, stood before the throne of the Most High. They reported what they had seen. They told of a world soaked in blood, of children devoured, of souls lost to terror, and they asked for permission to act. The answer came swiftly. The Nephilim would be destroyed. Their fathers, the Watchers, would be imprisoned, and the earth would be cleansed. But heaven, in its mercy, did not strike immediately. There would be a warning, a last vision, a final chance to understand the depth of their corruption. And so it began, not with thunder, not with fire, but with dreams, one by one. The giants began to see their end before it arrived. Dreams of rising waters, of trees cut down, of tablets inscribed with sentences of doom. They could no longer ignore it, even in their bloodlust, even in their madness. The Nephilim began to fear. They saw the future written across the sky and carved into the bones of the earth. And for the first time, they understood that something greater than them was coming. They had tried to devour the world, but now the world was rising against them. The hunger that had driven them would not be satisfied, because what they hungered for, belonging, purpose, peace, could never be found in a realm they were never meant to inherit. And as their dreams turned to nightmares, and their strength turned against itself, the last age of giants began to unravel. While the giants raged and devoured, while the world bled beneath their feet, one man walked with God. His name was Enoch, and unlike any other in his generation, he did not simply observe the world's decay, he was invited beyond it. The Book of Enoch and the Book of Giants both agree. Enoch was chosen, taken into the heavenly realms while still alive, shown visions that no other mortal had seen. He did not die. He was transformed, and when he returned, he carried with him the weight of heaven's decree. His message was not one of hope. It was a warning carved in eternity. The Nephilim feared the dreams that plagued them. They knew they meant something, even if they could not decipher the symbols. Trees falling, cities burning, water rising. These were not hallucinations. They were prophecies. And so, in desperation, the giants held a council. Amid the fragments of the Book of Giants, there is a scene in which they agree to send one of their own Mahwe, the son of Barakil, to find Enoch, not to kill him, but to ask him to plead, to understand. It was the first act of humility in the entire history of their race. It was also their last. Mahwe, faster than any other giant, set out across the broken earth. He crossed mountain ranges and barren lands, past ruined villages and dried riverbeds, until he reached the place where heaven and earth touched. There, in a garden that shimmered with otherworldly light, Enoch waited. He was already expecting the visitor, not because he was warned, but because he had seen it long before. The book says he did not raise his voice. He did not curse. Instead, he welcomed the giant with sorrow in his eyes. Mahwe, once proud, now bowed before the prophet, asking the question that burned inside every Nephilim heart. Can we be saved? Secondines, in frenzy. The answer was as swift as it was terrible. Enoch spoke not his own words, but those given to him in the presence of God. There is no mercy left, he said. No redemption, no second chance. The sentence has already been spoken. The waters are gathering. The time is set. Your bodies will be destroyed. Your spirits will not rise. You will wander the earth, restless, until the end of all things. In that moment, even the wind grew still. The garden that bloomed with color and sound became silent. And Mawe, who had crossed the earth for hope, left with a scroll that contained his race's doom. Enoch's message was more than a prophecy. It was a declaration that the world itself could no longer contain what had been created. The Nephilim were not just sinners, they were fractures in the fabric of reality. Their very nature was incompatible with life. They were born of heaven and earth, but belonged to neither. They could not ascend to the heavens. They could not rest with the dead. Their end was not only death, it was exile from existence. And even in that exile, they would become something else, spirits without bodies, minds without rest, the source of future torment for mankind. Demons, not in title, but in essence. This message, when Mawe returned and delivered it to the council of the giants, shattered what little order remained among them. Some wept, others roared, some denied it outright, calling Enoch a liar, but in their hearts, they knew it was true. The dreams they had been having were too vivid. The fear that clawed at their minds was too strong. The flood wasn't coming. It had already begun, first in visions, then in the trembling of the ground, then in the unraveling of their sanity. Enoch returned to his isolation. But his role was not yet complete. The heavens were still open to him. He continued to see things no man had seen. He watched as the archangels were summoned. He saw the chains forged in light, prepared for the watchers who had broken their vows. He saw the plans for the flood, not just the water, but the cleansing, a reset of the world, a wiping away of blood, of screams, of the corruption that had spread like rot into every corner of creation. And he saw Noah. Noah, the descendant of Enoch, was already being prepared, a man pure in generations, righteous in a time where righteousness had all but disappeared. He was not chosen at random. His bloodline was untainted. His heart was steady. And through him, the world would begin again. Enoch was not shown salvation for the giants, but he was shown a path for humanity. He saw the ark. He saw the animals gather. He saw the rain begin to fall, and then he saw the waters rise, swallowing the last cries of a dying age. The role of Enoch in the Book of Giants is not just that of a messenger. He is a bridge, a living boundary between mercy and judgment. He walks in both worlds and speaks with the voice of a kingdom that cannot be moved. He does not curse the Nephilim. He grieves for them. He does not raise his hand to destroy. He opens his mouth to reveal what has already been set in motion. And perhaps the most terrifying part of all is that he offers no escape. Not because he is cruel, but because there is no escape to offer. The judgment is not presented as an act of vengeance. It is correction. The world is a vessel that has been cracked by rebellion. The flood is not merely punishment. It is healing. But healing, when the disease has spread too far, often means amputation. The Nephilim were the infection. The Watchers were the wound. The flood would be the scalpel. Even now, the fragments tremble with this truth. The Book of Giants does not flinch. It does not soften the blow. The giants were warned. They were given the chance to ask. They were sent a prophet who had walked the very halls of heaven. And in return, they were given the one thing that heaven gives even to the damned: truth. Not comfort, not reprieve, but clarity. And in that clarity, the fate of giants was sealed. Before the flood fell, before the angels descended with chains of fire and judgment, the giants dreamed. These were not dreams in the human sense, not memories, not fantasies, but revelations from a realm beyond comprehension. They came without warning, without mercy, night after night. Visions tore through the minds of the Nephilim. leaving them shaken and uncertain. And for the first time since their monstrous birth, fear gripped them, not the fear of men, whom they had crushed, not the fear of death, which they barely believed in. This was the fear of something greater, something inevitable. It began with Oya, one of the mightiest of all Nephilim. His dream was a garden unreal, glowing, a paradise untouched by decay. Trees taller than his own towering form stretched into the heavens, bearing fruit that shimmered with divine light. He walked through this place in peace, unafraid. For a moment, it was as if he belonged there. But then the sky darkened. A wind unlike any on earth began to blow. From above descended beings of light, angels, not in wrath, but in silence. They carried axes and saws and began to cut the garden down. Trees fell with agonizing slowness. Flowers wilted beneath celestial boots. Fruit rotted on the vine. Oya screamed, but no sound came. He ran to stop them, but his hands passed through them like mist. When all was ruined, he heard a voice, not loud, but clear. Your time is finished. All that you are will be cut down. And then, nothing. He awoke, drenched in cold sweat, the silence of the garden still ringing in his ears. He tried to dismiss it, but the next night, it came again, and not only to him. Haya, his twin, dreamed of a massive stone tablet covered in fire. As he watched, new words carved themselves into the stone, line after line of judgment, written in a script he could not read, but somehow understood. The lines grew until the tablet tilted, threatening to fall upon him. He tried to run. He could not move. He cried out. No one heard. The tablet fell, and in that final moment, before he awoke, he felt what it meant to be judged, not for what he had done, but for what he was. Gilgamesh saw fire, not just flames, but a cleansing force that consumed cities and kings and monuments. His temples turned to ash. His throne melted. His name burned away from stone. He stood in the center of the inferno, untouched but aware that everything he had built would not survive him. He tried to flee the dream. It followed him. He tried to wake, but the fire would not let him go. His screams echoed through the ruined halls of his memory. The dreams spread like a sickness among the Nephilim. Some wept, others raged. Some denied what they saw, calling it sorcery, but most could not ignore it, because it was not only the dreams, it was the feeling that came with them. The certainty, the knowledge that the end was no longer a theory. It had begun, and they, the giants, the mighty, the born rulers of a world they had desecrated, could do nothing to stop it. The Book of Giants records that the dreams changed the Nephilim, not all at once, not in the same way, but cracks formed in their pride. They began to gather something they had not done peacefully in years. Giants from distant lands left their wars and fortresses, converging on sacred places, seeking answers. Mahwe spoke aloud what none dared to say. These are not ordinary dreams. These are messages. When asked who sent them, he answered without hesitation, not our fathers, something higher. His voice, usually quiet, carried weight now. Even the violent ones listened. And when someone whispered the name of God, silence fell over the gathering like a shroud. In desperation, they asked, could the dreams be interpreted? Could they be warnings, not sentences? Could there still be a way out? The question lingered in the air like smoke, and then Mahwe said the name that none had dared to speak. Enoch. Tuwais, the prophet, the one who had walked with God, the man who had entered the heavenly realms and returned with knowledge no other human possessed. the one whose words carried the weight of heaven itself. The Nephilim debated. Some said it was weakness to seek out a human. Others argued that knowledge was power, and that if Enoch held the meaning of the dreams, they had to hear it, whether he brought hope or doom. Mahwe volunteered to go. He, the swiftest among them, would cross the broken lands and seek out the prophet. But even before Mahwe's return, the dreams grew worse. Some Nephilim stopped sleeping entirely, terrified of what awaited in the night. Those who dreamed saw visions of being buried alive, of being chained in darkness, of being turned to smoke and ash. They heard voices chanting their names as curses. They saw great waters swallowing everything they had ever known. They saw the faces of their victims rising from the deep, eyes hollow, mouths whispering the same sentence. We remember. Mares, one particularly disturbing fragment, tells of Ahijah, the cruelest of the giants, waking from a dream and clawing at his own chest, sobbing that his heart had been stolen. They took it. He screamed. They took it and weighed it, and it was found wanting. He fled into the wilderness, and none ever saw him again. Some believe he tried to escape judgment. Others believe he was taken before the flood came. For beings born of rebellion, born of strength, born to rule, the fear of death was never supposed to be real. They had believed themselves immune beyond consequence. But the dreams shattered that illusion. What had once been nightmares became prophecy. What had once been visions became evidence. And the most terrifying part was that the dreams were not about dying. They were about what came after. They dreamed of wandering, of becoming shadows, of seeing without being seen, of existing in a world that no longer had a place for them. They dreamed of never finding rest, of being hated, feared, forgotten, yet still alive. This was not the punishment of the body. It was the torment of the soul. Even the earth seemed to reflect their dread. The skies dimmed, the stars flickered, animals vanished, rivers turned black. The giants walked slower now, not from weakness, but from the weight of what they now knew. No fortress would save them. No mountain would rise high enough. The dreams had made that clear. The flood would cover all. The Nephilim had dreamed of dominion. Now they dreamed of extinction. And they understood that what they were seeing was not a threat. It was a promise. Heaven does not warn for nothing. It speaks once, and then it acts. By the time Mahwe returned from his meeting with Enoch, the dreams had consumed the minds of the Nephilim. Their world was no longer only dying from their violence, it was unraveling from within. Mahwe arrived at a valley where dozens of giants had gathered. The land beneath them was cracked, dry, the trees stripped bare by years of overconsumption and battle. Their eyes turned to him, desperate, furious, afraid. In his hand, he held the scroll given by Enoch. On it was written the decree of heaven, their sentence, passed not by angels, not by men, but by the very voice that had spoken creation into existence. He did not speak at first. He handed the scroll to Oya. The towering son of Shemihazah unrolled it with hands that had once crushed cities. As he read, the tension in his shoulders vanished, replaced by something no one had ever seen on his face: resignation. His voice trembled as he said, "It is a death sentence." Around him, murmurs turned to roars. The giants surged forward, demanding to know what had been written. One by one, they read it, line after line, word after word, and their fury turned to disbelief. Disbelief turned to dread, and dread turned into something no one expected: begging. The Book of Giants does not glorify this moment. It does not turn their fear into pity, but it records it clearly. The Nephilim, proud and terrible, fell to their knees, Some screamed, others tore at their hair, their skin, the earth itself. "We did not choose this," they cried. "We were born into it." Others called out to their fathers, the watchers who had long since retreated into silence or hiding. "Why did you make us?" they shouted. "Why did you bring us into a world that hates us?" In the chaos, a few tried to find a loophole. Could they flee to the highest mountains? Could they build cities above the clouds? Could they hide in the farthest places of the earth? But Mahwe's voice silenced them all. "There is nowhere the water will not reach. Nowhere your spirits can hide. The judgment is not a flood. The flood is only the instrument. The judgment is total." Men, some demanded that Enoch be summoned again, that he be forced to speak with them face to face. But Mahwe only shook his head. "He will not come. He has seen what is written. There is nothing more to say." And in that silence, a voice rose not from a warrior, but from a giantess named Anael, one of the few female Nephilim known to the fragments. Her words were not of defiance, but of sorrow. "If we cannot be forgiven," she said, "can we be remembered?" It was the first time any of them had spoken of legacy. It was not long before the giants turned to their fathers, the Watchers, who had once stood tall above humanity, now hid in caves and beneath mountains, fearing the same judgment their children faced. But the Nephilim found them. Some begged, others raged. "Speak to heaven for us," they said. "Plead for our lives." But the Watchers had already tried. Long ago, Enoch had interceded for them, carrying their petition to God. The answer had been final. "You will not ascend. You will not be heard. Your children will be destroyed." Has abilities, Macon too. One fragment records a confrontation between Shemihaza and his sons, Oya and Haya. They found their father in a deep ravine, cloaked in shadows. "You gave us names," they said. "You taught us to rule. Why can't you save us?" Shemihaza, once so powerful, could not even meet their gaze. "I broke the law of heaven," he whispered, "and through me, you were born. But now I can do nothing. I cannot even lift my eyes toward the sky." His sons left him there, whether in sorrow or disgust. The text does not say. The Nephilim began to divide. Some still believed they could fight their way out. If heaven was sending angels, then let them battle. Let them die in combat rather than drown like beasts. These were led by Haya, who sharpened his weapons and called on the others to join him. But others, led by Mahwe and a few more thoughtful giants, refused. "What war can be won against the one who commands the sea?" they asked. "What sword can strike water?" These giants spoke of surrender, of waiting, of facing their end with dignity. But even among those who accepted their fate, the pleading did not stop. Some tried rituals, chants passed down from their fathers. Others fasted, hoping to cleanse themselves. A few even tried to offer sacrifices, trying to mimic the humans they once mocked. They built altars. They spilled blood, not of others but their own. They thought perhaps, if the gods saw remorse, they might relent. But the skies stayed silent. The stars did not move. The dreams continued, and judgment marched closer with every sunrise. One of the most tragic entries in the fragments describes a night when several Nephilim gathered on a high plateau. They stood in a circle, hands joined, looking toward the heavens. "We were born from light and flesh," they said in unison. "Let the light take us back. Let the water pass over." And they waited all night, but nothing came. No voice, no flame, only the wind, cold and uncaring, whispering through the stones. When dawn came, They were still there, kneeling, silent, broken. The Book of Giants does not end their story here, but it marks this moment as a turning point. Before, the giants had been terrors untouchable, undefeatable, unchallenged. Now, they were desperate. They had looked into the mirror of prophecy and seen what they were: unwanted children, not by their mothers, not even by their fathers, but by the very structure of the universe. There was no place for them, not in the skies, not in the earth, not in Sheol or paradise. Their birth was a violation, and their death was the only cure. And yet, in that despair, they reached out, not to rule, not to destroy, but to be heard. That is the cruelest detail in this part of the tale, that at the very end, when the Nephilim finally understood the truth, when they finally felt the weight of their sin and cried out for mercy, heaven had already closed the door. While the Nephilim begged for salvation on the surface of the dying world, far above them, judgment was already being prepared, not only for the giants, but for their fathers, the Watchers, those once glorious angels who had descended from heaven in rebellion, were not forgotten. Their crimes had been recorded. Their fate, like that of their children, was sealed. They had not only abandoned their posts, they had corrupted creation itself. And now, the divine order they once defied moved against them, with a justice that was absolute, cold, and irreversibly. The archangels descended not with fanfare, but with finality. Michael, the commander of God's armies, was first. His presence alone split the skies. Raphael followed, the healer of heaven, but this time his hands did not bring comfort. Gabriel, the messenger, carried not words of hope, but sentences of doom. And Uriel, the light of God, arrived bearing the keys to the prisons prepared for the fallen. Each of them knew their roles. There would be no war, no opportunity for repentance. The time for intercession had passed. What remained was enforcement. The Watchers had scattered since their descent. Some hid in the mountains. Others lived deep beneath the earth or within crumbled cities abandoned by their sons. They had once ruled openly, walking among men and gods alike, teaching forbidden knowledge as if they were sages. But now, they hid like fugitives. Even their strength had waned. Their celestial light, once brilliant, had dimmed. The longer they remained on earth, severed from heaven, the more their forms withered. What had once been luminous became hollow. What had once been majestic became monstrous. They had not merely fallen, they had decomposed. The Book of Giants offers glimpses of their capture. Shemi-Hazar, the chief among them, was found in a cave near a river that no longer flowed. He did not resist. When Michael appeared, the Watcher fell to his knees. "I know why you have come," he said. "I have seen the dreams. I have heard the silence." His chains were not physical. They were made of light and law, binding his soul as much as his limbs. He did not beg for freedom, only for his children. "Spare them," he whispered. "Spare my sons." But Michael did not answer. His mission was not to negotiate, it was to bind. Azazel, on the other hand, resisted. Known for teaching men to make weapons and women to paint their faces, he had embraced his fall completely. He forged his own armor, believing he could withstand even the wrath of God's messengers. When Uriel found him, Azazel raised a sword etched with symbols of power, shouting curses in the language of the stars. But Uriel did not flinch. With a single gesture, he extinguished the weapon. With a single word, he broke Azazel's will. "You have taught destruction," Uriel said. and now you will be buried beneath it." Azazel was dragged through the dust, his screams echoing across the wasteland, until the earth itself opened to swallow him. The prisons prepared for the Watchers were unlike anything in the mortal world. These were not cells of stone and bars. They were spiritual pits, realms of darkness and isolation, far beneath the earth, outside the flow of time. Some traditions call them Tartarus, others the abyss. But all agree, once cast into these places, no being escapes. The Watchers were sealed there, their senses dulled, their voices muted, their memories stretched across eons. They could not die, but they could suffer, and suffer they did. Barakiel, father of Mahwe, was one of the last to be taken. His son had delivered Enoch's prophecy. He had tried to warn the others. Unlike many of the Watchers, Barakiel did not flee. When Raphael came for him, he simply turned his face toward the stars. "Do you think we meant for this to happen?" he asked. Raphael, full of sorrow, answered only, "Intent does not erase consequence." With that, the healer bound him not with cruelty, but with mourning. For Barakiel was not evil, but he was guilty, and the law of heaven makes no distinction between the two when the balance of creation is at stake. The Book of Enoch adds further weight to their sentence. It says that the Watchers will remain imprisoned until the day of judgment, when they will be brought forth to face their final reckoning. Their chains are not temporary. Their isolation is not probation. It is an eternal waiting, suspended between their ancient glory and their future destruction. And as they wait, they remember every lesson they taught, every name they gave their sons, every scream they caused. The punishment is not just confinement, it is memory. Their fall is perhaps the greatest tragedy of all. For the Watchers were not demons. They were not born in rebellion. They were angels, beings of unimaginable beauty and power. They were trusted, honored, given purpose, and in their desire to bridge heaven and earth, they tore both apart. They wanted to love, but their love was not sanctioned. They wanted to teach, but their wisdom was forbidden. They thought they were bringing light to the world, but they brought fire. And now, they wait in darkness. There is no redemption arc in their story, no final act of heroism. Their names are remembered not as saints or martyrs, but as the authors of the age of giants, the fathers of monsters. And yet, their punishment was not vengeance. It was containment. Heaven did not destroy them in anger. It removed them in sorrow, because divine justice, though perfect, is never cruel. The Watchers were bound not to punish their fall, but to stop the consequences from spreading any further. Their story echoes in every generation. It is a warning not only about rebellion, but about the misuse of power, the arrogance of knowledge, and the danger of giving gifts that were never ours to give. The Watchers loved, but not righteously. They taught, but not wisely. And in doing so, they brought the flood upon the world and the chains upon themselves. As the giants wept and the Watchers were bound, a different preparation was taking place, far from the lands soaked in blood and fear. In a quiet corner of the world, where the cries of the Nephilim could not be heard and the earth had not yet been scarred by their endless hunger, a man worked in silence. His name was Noah. He was not a warrior, not a prophet like Enoch, not a king like Gilgamesh. He was a builder, a listener, a man whose bloodline remained untainted by the fallen ones. And in him, heaven saw the future. The Book of Enoch says that Noah was chosen not only for his righteousness, but because his lineage was pure. In a world overrun by corrupted flesh, by beings born of heaven and earth in a union that had no blessing, Noah stood as a last remnant of what mankind was meant to be. He walked with God. He did not rule over others. He did not seek forbidden knowledge. He did not raise monuments to his name. He obeyed. And when the word came that the flood was approaching, he listened. The warning came not in dreams, but in direct command. The Most High spoke, "Build an ark, not a ship for travel, but a vessel for survival, a coffin for the old world, and a cradle for the new." The dimensions were given precisely 300 cubits long, 50 wide, 30 high. It was to be made of gopher wood, sealed with pitch. Every piece of it, a labor of faith. It would take decades to build, decades during which Noah would be mocked, ignored, threatened, because to the people of his time, the idea of a flood that would cover mountains was madness. Rain? Yes. Storms? Of course. But the end of the world? Impossible. But Noah knew. His grandfather Enoch had warned him. His father Lamech had passed on the visions. And now, the skies themselves began to change. The stars no longer moved as they once had. The seasons warped. Animals grew restless. The earth vibrated with anticipation. Nature itself knew what was coming, even if men did not. The Nephilim, too, felt the shift. Some, like Mahweh, watched the construction from afar, saying nothing. Others mocked it, calling Noah a madman building a coffin under the sun. "Will your little box float when the sky tears open?" One giant is said to have laughed. "Will it save you from us?" But Noah kept building, hammering through sweat, fear, and ridicule. He spoke little. He prayed much. His family worked beside him, his wife, his sons, their wives, all part of a covenant they barely understood, but obeyed without hesitation. The Book of Giants suggests that a few Nephilim considered destroying the ark, if they could not be saved. Why should anyone survive? But infighting, growing despair, and the eerie stillness of the air kept them away. It was as if something invisible had wrapped itself around Noah and his vessel, a shield they could not cross. Or perhaps, deep down, they knew that what was coming could not be stopped, that the ark was not the threat. The flood was. The animals began to gather, not because they were summoned by man, but because they were summoned by heaven. Pairs from every kind, some walking for weeks, others flying in strange formations overhead. They came not in terror, but in quiet resolve. Lions lay beside lambs, eagles beside doves. The ark became not just a boat, but a symbol of reversal, of harmony, of what the world might have been if sin had not entered it. And still, the sky held. The giants watched, the humans mocked, but the ark stood, completed, massive, silent, a monument to a faith that defied reason. Some fragments from later traditions suggest that a few humans tried to bargain with Noah. "Take us with you," they pleaded. "We believe now." But Noah could only shake his head. "I do not close the door," he said, "but it is not mine to open either, because heaven had not yet sealed it. And once it did, the time of mercy would end." Meanwhile, the Nephilim fell further into chaos. The dreams were worse now, unrelenting visions of drowning, of darkness, of wandering through empty lands as bodiless spirits. Some tried to escape into the mountains. Others turned on each other, desperate to find food. Blame, hope, Oya and Haya were last seen arguing on the edge of a cliff, each blaming the other for the flood they could not stop. Gilgamesh stood atop the ruins of his fortress, screaming challenges to the sky. Mahweh sat in silence, watching the horizon, waiting. Then came the final sign. The animals had entered the ark. The sky changed color, not gray, not blue, but something that defied description. The air turned still, not with peace, but with held breath. And Noah received the last instruction: enter the ark. With trembling steps, he obeyed. His sons followed, his wife, their wives, and when they were all inside, the hand of God closed the door. That sound, the sealing of the ark, was the beginning of the end. The Nephilim heard it and knew. The watchers felt it in their prisons. The humans still outside laughed nervously, pretending they did not feel the shift. But they knew, too, something ancient, something righteous, something inescapable was coming. And then came the first raindrop. The ark stood silent, sealed from within, like a tomb holding not the dead, but the last hope of the living. Outside, the world carried on in a kind of unnatural calm. The skies, heavy with unshed rain, hovered over a planet that refused to believe its fate. Men still traded goods in the marketplace. Children still laughed. Fires still crackled in hearths. And yet, beneath it all, there was a pressure, a tension that made animals restless and silenced even the bravest of hearts. It was the quiet before the scream, the breath before the wave, and the last chance for anything to change, though nothing would. The Nephilim, those ancient beings whose very existence defied the natural order, no longer roared in pride or marched in conquest. Their hunger had turned inward, their power reduced to fragments of a dying empire. The dreams had returned with greater force. Mahwe no longer slept at all. Gilgamesh stood atop his crumbling palace, no longer bellowing threats, but whispering to the wind, as though seeking forgiveness from a god who had long since answered. Oya and Haya, once united, then divided, met in the ruins of their ancestral hall and stared at each other in silence. They had been born into a war they did not begin, and now they would die in a flood they could not escape. Among the humans, disbelief still ruled. Noah had preached. He had built the ark in public view. His work was not hidden, nor was his warning whispered. For over a century he had labored, not only with his hands but with his voice, calling men to repentance. But few listened. They mocked him, calling him a madman who feared the clouds. It hasn't rained in years. They laughed. Why should it start now? Some tried to bribe him for a place on the ark. Others threatened him in the final days, demanding he open the door. But it was no longer in Noah's hands. The door had been closed not with hinges, but with holiness. And then something changed. The air grew cold, not the chill of winter, but the cold of something wrong. The wind no longer blew. The sun, veiled behind thick clouds, ceased to give warmth. The birds vanished. The animals grew silent. The earth itself seemed to hold its breath. The people who had mocked now stood frozen, staring at the sky. No one spoke. No one moved. Then came the sound, not thunder, but something deeper. A groaning, a crack, as if the bones of the world were shifting. The fountains of the deep were beginning to break. The first drops of rain were not gentle. They hit the ground like small stones, hard and fast. A few children laughed and reached up, thinking it was a passing storm. But then the wind rose not from one direction, but from all. Dust swirled, trees bent, and the rain came harder. Within minutes, it was no longer rain. It was walls of water, falling from a sky that seemed to split open. The flood had begun. The Book of Giants does not linger on these moments. It fragments. A line here, a sentence there. The mountains fled. The deep burst forth. They cried for the rocks to cover them. But what it lacks in detail, It makes up for in weight, because this was not merely a natural disaster. It was a cosmic reckoning. The skies poured judgment. The earth opened its veins. The old world, built on blood and broken laws, was being washed away by something it could not defy. The Nephilim ran, for all their size, for all their strength. They ran, they climbed mountains, leapt across valleys, tried to flee the rising tide. Some attempted to fight, striking the water as though it were an enemy they could wound. Others cried out, calling for their fathers, the Watchers, to save them. But the Watchers were gone, buried in chains beneath the world, powerless, and the angels had turned their faces away. This was not a battle. This was a sentence being carried out. One story survives of a Nephilim who climbed to the top of a mountain so high that he could see beyond the clouds. As the water surged, he screamed, "I lived. I ruled. I mattered." But even his voice was drowned. His body vanished beneath the wave, and the mountain crumbled behind him. These were not deaths in silence. They were witnessed. The angels stood above the chaos, not intervening, but watching, ensuring that the decree was fulfilled, that no Nephilim survived. The humans who had refused to believe now pounded on the ark's walls, screaming Noah's name, but the vessel remained shut. Some tried to cling to the hull, hoping to survive by proximity. Others cursed the sky, thinking still that if they shouted loud enough, the flood would turn. But water does not negotiate. It rises, and it remembers every village razed, every child devoured, every altar built to the sons of fallen angels. The flood remembered, and it came to erase. Inside the ark, there was no celebration, only silence. Noah did not rejoice as the waves climbed. His family did not cheer as the screams faded. They wept, for neighbors, for kin, for the world, for the children who had laughed just days before, and for the giants, too, because despite their crimes, despite their terror, the Nephilim were still souls, created in rebellion. Yes, but still conscious, still weeping, still doomed. 40 days of rain followed, 40 nights of darkness. The flood did not just cover the land, it reshaped it. Mountains vanished, valleys were buried. The bones of the old world were ground to dust beneath the tide. And yet, above it all, the ark floated silent, steady, carried not by chance, but by covenant. The final days before the flood were not marked by fire or sword, but by warning, the dreams, the building, the silence. And when the door closed, it was not the flood that began, but the end of mercy. After that, only water, only judgment, only remembrance. It began as rain, but it did not remain rain for long. The heavens, once distant and silent, broke open as if torn by divine hands. From above, water poured with impossible weight, not in drops but in torrents, as if the sky itself were collapsing. From below, the earth groaned and split. The fountains of the deep burst forth with explosive force, gushing upward in pillars that shattered rock and drowned valleys. It was not a storm. It was a reversal, a divine undoing of everything creation had tried to hold together since the day the Watchers fell. The Nephilim, the giants who once stood above all creation, were the first to feel the change. Their size, their strength, their pride, all meant nothing now. They had watched Noah enter the ark. They had laughed when the first drops fell. But now, as the world turned to water, they began to run, not march, not rule. Run. They fled to high ground, climbed mountains, raised their arms against the storm, but none of it mattered. The water chased them like a living thing, like a judgment that had eyes and memory and fury. For the first time, the giants understood fear not as an abstract concept, but as a living presence, surrounding them, silencing them, swallowing them. Oya and Haya, the twin sons of Shemihaza, were last seen together, embracing atop a cliff that would soon disappear beneath the flood. They had fought their wars, ruled their armies, defied heaven itself, but now there was no one left to defy. Their final moments were not roars of power, but whispers of regret, heard by no one, carried away by wind and rain. Mahwe stood on the edge of a crumbling plateau. His eyes turned to the ark in the distance. He did not run. He did not cry out. He waited, drenched, still, silent, and when the wave came, he did not fight it. Gilgamesh, the king of ruined cities, did fight. He swam through the rising flood, his limbs carving through the waves with unnatural strength. He climbed trees, leapt over sinking buildings, clawed his way up mountaintops, refusing to die. He had ruled men. He had challenged heaven. He would not be defeated by water. But even he could not escape what had been written. The waters rose past his knees, his chest, his neck. He roared one final time before the flood silenced his voice forever. The Book of Giants gives us no poetry for their deaths, only fragments. And the waters rose, and their breath failed, and their bones were scattered. It does not mourn them. It does not celebrate. It simply records, because there is nothing left to say when the judgment of God arrives in full. The giants died not because they were defeated in battle, but because they were never meant to live. Their destruction was not a punishment for what they had done, but a correction of what they were. The Watchers, imprisoned beneath the earth, could feel it too. Shemihaza, chained in his cavern of darkness, cried out as his sons disappeared from the world. They were mine, he whispered. I taught them, I named them, but no voice answered. No light reached him. His chains remained. The angels had done their work, and now all that remained was silence. Across the earth, water claimed everything. Forests vanished. Cities crumbled. Fields were erased. The works of men and giants alike were wiped clean. As if drawn on sand and struck by wind, the cries of those who remained did not rise above the storm. The flood drowned even memory. Inside the ark, there was no cheering, no relief, only tears. Noah, righteous and faithful, still wept, not only for the lost, but for the world itself, for the laughter that would never return, the children who would never grow, the lessons that had come too late. As the rain poured and the waves surged, the angels moved among the floodwaters not to save, but to watch. Michael walked atop the waves, his presence a stillness in the chaos. Raphael comforted the animals in the ark with a calm, unseen. Gabriel held the winds in balance. Uriel, guardian of the deep, sealed the earth behind him, closing the fountains that had been opened only for this moment. They did not gloat. They did not rejoice. They executed the sentence with the same solemnity with which it had been delivered. For heaven grieves even when it judges. One by one, the giants vanished beneath the waves. Their bodies, once monuments to celestial pride, floated briefly, then sank. Some believe their spirits fled instantly, cast into a state of restless wandering. Others say their souls remained in torment beneath the water for a time, remembering what they had been, mourning what they could never be again. Either way, their age had ended, their voices were gone, But the flood did not recede quickly. It raged for 40 days and 40 nights, turning the world into an ocean of memory and sorrow. The waters cleansed the earth not just of flesh, but of history, the temples of the giants, the bones of their armies, the scrolls they wrote, all lost. What remained were stories, warnings, fragments of truth hidden in desert caves and passed down in fearful whispers. When the ark finally came to rest atop the mountains of Ararat, the world was no longer the same. The air smelled different. The sky was clearer. But beneath the calm was the memory of everything that had been buried. The giants were gone, but their story would survive in dreams, in demons, in the blood of those still cursed to wander. The Book of Giants ends this chapter not with triumph, but with the reminder that even divine judgment leaves scars. The waters receded, but the consequences would echo forever. When the last raindrop fell and the final wave stilled, a terrible silence settled over the earth. No bird song, no footsteps, no laughter, only wind and water and sky. For 150 days, the ark drifted on a sea with no shore, carrying life above a world that no longer resembled anything familiar. Beneath its hull lay not just drowned cities and shattered fortresses, but an entire age, the age of the Nephilim, wiped from memory, cleansed from the land, erased by judgment. The giants were gone, the watchers were chained, but the scars they left behind would echo far beyond the reach of water. When the ark came to rest atop the mountains of Ararat, the world had been transformed. The peaks that once scraped the sky were softened. Valleys had become lakes. Great plains were now seabeds. It was not simply a new world. It was a world reborn from trauma. And stepping out into it were not warriors, not rulers, not priests, but a single family. Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives. 8 souls carrying the weight of creation's second chance. They stepped onto land still wet with memory. Around them, silence reigned. No ruins remained of the giant cities. No bones from their titanic corpses. The flood had not only killed, it had buried. Nature itself had conspired to forget. But forgetting is not healing. The skies were clear now, but they bore witness to the cries that once rose from the flood. The wind carried the echoes of voices that had once challenged heaven. And even though the land was dry, the memory of water still lingered in the soil. The Book of Giants falls silent after the flood. Its fragments end in sorrow and mystery, as though even the scribes could not speak of what came next. But from other texts, Genesis, Enoch, and the whispers of ancient traditions, we understand that the flood was not an end. It was a reset. God made a covenant with Noah, marked by a rainbow in the sky. A promise: never again would the earth be destroyed in this way. But a deeper truth lived beneath that promise. The world had been cleansed, not perfected. Noah offered a sacrifice upon stepping onto dry ground, a gesture of gratitude and fear. He knew what he had witnessed. He knew what had been spared and what had not. The smoke from his altar rose into a sky that had once poured judgment and now watched in stillness. God accepted the offering, but something had changed. The innocence of Eden would never return. Mankind had been given a new beginning, but not a new nature. And what of the Nephilim? Their bodies were gone, their thrones shattered. But their spirits, those hybrid souls born of heaven and earth, had not passed away. Enoch had warned of this. The flood could drown flesh. It could silence voices, but it could not destroy what had no place to go. The spirits of the giants remained on earth restless, bitter, wondering. They were no longer Nephilim. They were something else, something that would haunt the generations to come. These spirits became what many traditions would later call demons. disembodied, hungry, vengeful. They could no longer build kingdoms, but they could whisper into minds. They could no longer command armies, but they could influence kings. They could not walk among men, but they could torment them in darkness. The flood had removed their presence, but not their influence. The new world was not free of evil. It was merely free of visible giants. Noah's descendants would repopulate the earth, but they would carry stories, tales of the time before the flood, of the giants, of the angels who fell, and though much of it would fade into myth, fragments would survive. Names like Gilgamesh, words like Nephilim, symbols etched into stone and remembered in whispers. And in certain places, giants would appear again, not in form, but in reputation. The sons of Enoch, the Rephaim, Goliath of Gath, echoes, perhaps, or survivals, or shadows of a curse that refused to die. Yet even amid all this, the covenant remained, a bow in the sky, a reminder that destruction would not be the only answer. That mercy still existed. That judgment, while real, would never again come without the possibility of redemption. Noah's world was hard, broken, unfamiliar, but it was alive, and from it, a new chapter of humanity began. The aftermath of the flood was not clean. It was not triumphal. It was haunted. Every sunrise reminded Noah's family of what had been lost. Every soundless night was filled with memories of screams beneath the water, and every prayer carried both thanks and sorrow. They had survived, but they had seen what judgment looked like when the heavens opened and the deep answered back. The Book of Giants does not celebrate the flood. It mourns it, not because the judgment was unjust, but because it was necessary. That is the heart of its tragedy. The giants had to die. The watchers had to be bound. But that necessity does not erase the weight of what was done. The new world would not be lighter, only cleaner. And in that silence, creation waited, hoping that this time, things would be different. The flood had come and gone. The Nephilim had drowned. The world had been remade. But the silence that followed did not erase the memory of giants. Their bodies may have been buried beneath layers of sediment and time, but their legacy endured in whispers, in ruins, and in bloodlines that bore traces of their existence. For though the Book of Giants ends with their destruction, the rest of the ancient world could not forget them so easily. Long after the flood, stories emerged in every corner of the ancient world, tales of men larger than life, of warriors with impossible strength, of ancient kings whose size and power defied natural law. In Canaan, the Anakim were feared, Moses' scouts, sent to explore the promised land, reported seeing descendants of giants. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. These were not metaphorical words. The fear was real. The memory of the Nephilim had not faded, it had evolved. Another race, the Rephaim, is mentioned in ancient Hebrew texts, sometimes translated simply as the dead. These beings were associated with the underworld, but also with a race of giants that once lived in the region. The land of Bashan, ruled by King Og, was infamous for its link to the Rephaim. Og's bed is described as measuring over 13 feet in length, details that seem almost mythological unless viewed through the lens of Nephilim survival. Could Og have been a distant echo of the fallen race? A hybrid remnant whose blood still bore the curse of the Watchers? The Philistine warrior Goliath, killed by David, is the most well-known example of a post-flood giant. Standing over 9 feet tall, armed with bronze that no ordinary man could lift, he mocked the armies of Israel, not only with strength but with arrogance. His brothers were also described as giants, suggesting a lineage, not a one-off anomaly. These were not beings with angelic fathers, but perhaps descendants diluted through generations, yet still carrying the size and fury of their ancestors. If the flood had wiped out the giants, it had not wiped out all traces of their corruption. Some traditions suggest that a few Nephilim survived the flood, either through refuge in the mountains, through hybrid lines, spared unknowingly, or through spiritual possession of human bodies. While the canonical texts do not support this directly, the persistence of giants in post-flood history cannot be ignored. The Book of Jubilees hints that evil spirits, the disembodied Nephilim, influenced the children of Noah, leading them astray in later generations. If they could not survive in flesh, they would survive in spirit, in legend, in whispered teachings passed down like poison. Outside the biblical world, myths from Mesopotamia, Greece, India, and Norse lands all speak of a golden age when gods or demigods walked the earth. The Sumerians wrote of Gilgamesh and Enkidu, beings of divine ancestry, towering and unstoppable. The Greeks spoke of the Titans, primordial giants who warred against the Olympians and were cast into Tartarus, a prison below the earth, echoing the Watcher's fate. In Norse mythology, the Jötnar were giants who preceded the gods and would return at the end of time to destroy them. These are not coincidences. They are cultural memories, distorted by time but rooted in a shared past, the era when giants ruled. Archaeological anomalies also feed this narrative. Reports, though controversial and often dismissed, have surfaced of oversized human bones, giant tools, and megalithic structures that defy explanation. While mainstream science offers natural explanations or denies these claims entirely, those who read the ancient texts see something else. Evidence, not proof in the modern sense, but confirmation that the earth remembers, even if we refuse to. The idea of a post-flood resurgence or survival of giants may seem like fantasy, but it reflects something deeper, the spiritual continuity of the Nephilim. Whether through blood, legend, or influence, they were not entirely erased. The war that began before the flood had simply changed form. The spirits of the giants, cursed to wander, continued to stir hearts, build empires, and provoke rebellion, power, violence, corruption. They were no longer confined to monstrous forms. They had entered the human soul. In every generation since, the question has remained, did the giants truly die, or did they simply learn to hide better? Not in caves, but in ideologies, in ambitions too large, in appetites too monstrous. The Nephilim may be gone, but the world they sought to build, a world of domination, separation from God, and worship of power, still tempts us. And so, their story echoes. In ruins, in folklore, in the towering figures of myth, not to inspire awe, but to serve as a warning. What was once washed away could rise again, not as flesh, but as spirit, as system. With as culture, the giants were defeated, but not forgotten. And in forgetting, we risk repeating the very path that led them to the flood. When the floodwaters receded and the last giant's breath was stolen by the sea, it might have seemed that the world was finally at peace. The great war between heaven and the corrupted had ended. The ark had survived. The watchers were bound in chains. The Nephilim were drowned. But in truth, the war was far from over, because what died in the flesh refused to die in spirit. The Book of Enoch tells us plainly, the souls of the Nephilim did not ascend to heaven, nor descend to Sheol. They remained, earthbound, restless, malevolent, and from these disembodied spirits came a new terror, demons. These spirits, born of unnatural union, were never meant to exist. Their bodies were the result of a crime against heaven. Their souls caught between two worlds. When their flesh perished in the flood, their spirits were left behind, wandering without form, purpose, or peace. They became angry, violent, parasitic, unable to build cities or raise armies. They instead turned their hunger toward the minds and souls of men. They possessed, they tormented, they whispered lies, and in doing so, they ensured that the corruption of the old world would echo into the new. The book of Enoch calls them evil spirits, distinct from fallen angels, unlike the Watchers, who still endured their punishment in dark prisons beneath the earth. The spirits of the giants were free, not in liberty, but in lawlessness. They roamed the earth, seeking bodies to enter, people to influence. They brought nightmares, sickness, rage, deception. Where once they had ruled with visible power, now they operated through subtle invasion, slipping through cracks in human hearts, embedding themselves in places of influence. The ancients understood this. In nearly every culture, tales of unclean spirits, restless, dead, or malevolent forces can be found. The Hebrews called them shedim, often associated with desert places and desolation. The Greeks spoke of daimones, intermediary beings who could bless or corrupt. In Mesopotamia, Lilu and Lilitu were spirits of the dead, linked to storms and seduction. Many of these beings carried traits reminiscent of the Nephilim: unnatural strength, towering rage, and deep hatred for mankind. These were not myths. They were memory, fragmented, distorted, but rooted in a truth that the world refused to forget. Jesus himself, in the New Testament, encounters these spirits frequently. They scream when he approaches. They recognize him before anyone else does. "Have you come to torment us before the time?" they ask, revealing not only fear, but knowledge of a judgment still to come. They beg not to be cast into the abyss, implying that such a fate is reserved for them at a future hour. And when cast out, they seek new hosts, new flesh, because they are incomplete without bodies. This is the hallmark of the Nephilim spirit: a hunger for form, a need to continue what was once interrupted. What makes these spirits different from fallen angels is their origin. Angels rebelled from above. Demons were born from rebellion. They are not former servants, they are bastard offspring of defiance. Their hatred for humanity runs deep, not only because man was chosen over them, but because they remember a time when they ruled, when humans feared them, worshipped them, fed them. Now, reduced to shadows, they exist in bitterness. They do not desire redemption. They desire revenge. Over the centuries, many have claimed to encounter these spirits not in towering form, but in possession, in deception, in the grip of voices that are not their own. Exorcists have described them as ancient, cruel, intelligent. They do not merely cause madness, they cultivate it. They mimic, manipulate, and destroy. And behind each encounter lies a whisper of an older world, a darker age, a time when these spirits wore flesh and walked among men as gods. The tragedy is that many no longer believe they exist. In a world that prides itself on reason and science, the idea of disembodied Nephilim influencing thoughts and behavior is dismissed. But this is exactly how they survive. The flood silenced their bodies. Doubt silences their memory. And in that silence, they thrive. Their greatest weapon is invisibility. They no longer need to rule nations when they can rule minds. Yet the ancient texts are clear. Their time is limited. Just as their fathers were bound in darkness, just as their bodies were drowned beneath the waves, These spirits, too, face a coming judgment. The abyss they fear is real. A final prison prepared not for flesh, but for spirit. The book of Revelation speaks of a time when the abyss will be opened and then sealed, when what has wandered the earth for millennia will be locked away. But until that day, they are with us, not as monsters in the flesh, but as whispers in the dark. The story of the Nephilim did not end with the flood. It transformed. Their spirits outlived their bodies. Their influence outlasted their empires. And even now, in quiet moments of temptation, in violent outbursts without explanation, in the haunting pull of darkness they breathe. Not as giants we can fight, but as demons we must discern. The war has changed. The enemy has changed form, but the threat is the same. And the question remains, do we still recognize them? Or have we become too civilized to believe in the monsters our ancestors feared? Because if we do not believe they exist, then perhaps they've already won. Before the flood, before the terror of the Nephilim devoured the world, there was a moment, a decision that changed the course of creation forever. It was not the birth of giants that brought judgment. It was the knowledge that birthed them. The Watchers did more than descend from heaven. They taught, and what they taught altered humanity's destiny. The book of Enoch describes it in chilling detail. Each fallen angel brought with him a gift, a secret, once held only by the divine, now whispered into human ears, forbidden knowledge, dangerous truths, and through these gifts, the earth was corrupted from within. Azazel taught men to forge swords and knives, shields and breastplates. Warfare, once unknown, became an art. Bloodshed, once rare, became ritual. Women learned the art of adornment, eye paint, jewelry, seductive dress from angels who twisted beauty into a weapon. Semjaza taught enchantments and root-cutting forms of magic, herbalism, and sorcery that tampered with the natural order. Armoros revealed how to break enchantments. Barakiel disclosed the stars and constellations. Kokabil taught the signs of the sky. Penemu revealed the secrets of writing, the ability to inscribe thought into permanence. And Kazdeja showed humanity the bites of serpents and the use of poisons. These teachings were not evil in themselves, but they came too early, too suddenly, too forcefully. Humanity, still innocent in many ways, was overwhelmed. Knowledge that should have been spread over millennia arrived in a single generation. There was no time to weigh it, no wisdom to steward it. What the Watchers offered was not wisdom, it was acceleration. And in that rush, humanity stumbled into destruction. The ancient world became a place of chaos. Men no longer tilled fields, they built weapons. Women no longer tended homes, they cast spells. Divination replaced prayer. Sorcery replaced science. Worship turned inward. With each lesson passed from Watcher to mortal, the connection between heaven and earth weakened. The Watchers had not merely broken divine law, they had re-engineered the world's foundation. And as a result, the earth itself began to groan. This forbidden knowledge is perhaps the most haunting legacy of the Watchers, because unlike their bodies now imprisoned, their teachings endured. After the flood, scraps of their knowledge resurfaced. In Babylonian astrology, in Egyptian, embalming rites, in the dark corners of Greek mystery schools, in ancient alchemy and occult rituals, the names may have changed, but the roots were the same. Humanity had tasted the fruit of the forbidden tree, and it hungered for more. Consider writing, a gift from Penemu. At first glance, harmless, even sacred. But writing enabled the recording of heresies, the preservation of dark incantations, the scripting of lies. It allowed power to become permanent, ideas to become empires. With ink and parchment, Man could manipulate far more than with a sword, or look to the stars, once a map of wonder, now turned into systems of astrological control, where destinies were rewritten by charlatans who claimed to read the heavens. Astronomy became astrology. Healing became sorcery. Art became seduction. Knowledge, once a path to truth, became a tool for control. And it did not end with ancient man. Even today, echoes of the Watcher's teachings persist. In modern occultism, in secret societies, in scientific pursuits that challenge the sanctity of life, technologies that manipulate DNA, experiments that push ethical boundaries, we pride ourselves on advancement, but seldom stop to ask, where did this drive come from? What if it began with a whisper, a lesson, a spark lit by a being who should never have taught us in the first place? The book of Enoch says that when God saw what had been taught to man, he was not merely angry, he was grieved. You have seen what Azazel has done, he says. Who has taught all unrighteousness on earth and revealed the eternal secrets? This was not a transgression of curiosity. It was a violation of trust, of design, of timing. There are things man was not meant to know, at least. Not yet. And the Watchers, in their pride, gave it all away. Some scholars argue that this knowledge led directly to the flood, not just because it enabled the rise of the Nephilim, but because it altered the balance of creation. When men use sacred knowledge outside of sacred purpose, the result is not enlightenment, it is decay. The heavens responded not in vengeance, but in defense. The flood was not revenge, it was containment. What makes this story more terrifying is how it continues. The Watchers are bound, but their secrets have escaped, and those who seek power without permission are still following in their footsteps. The danger is no longer giants, it is knowledge unmoored from morality. What was forbidden then remains a temptation now. Even now, in the age of science and enlightenment, mankind continues to dig where it should not, to question without reverence, to reach beyond the veil without understanding what lies behind it. And in doing so, we awaken old forces. Because knowledge, especially forbidden knowledge, is never neutral. It carries intent. It was born with purpose. And when that purpose is defied, the consequences are not academic. They are existential. The story of the Watchers is a warning not against learning, but against learning the wrong way, from the wrong source, at the wrong time. It is a reminder that some truths are wrapped in fire, and those who unwrap them will burn. The giants may be gone, the flood may be over, but the teachings remain. And perhaps the most terrifying thought of all is this: we are still listening. Long before the flood, before the giants rose and fell, before Noah built his ark, there was a man who walked with God, Enoch. His name appears briefly in Genesis, but in the apocryphal texts, especially the Book of Enoch and the Book of Giants, his role is monumental. He was not a warrior or king, yet he stood between heaven and earth, a mortal who entered the divine council, a man who did not die, but was taken. Enoch's life was more than an ancient mystery. It was a warning, a map, a prophecy whose final chapter has not yet come to pass. Enoch's mission was simple, but terrifying. He was to serve as a messenger between two realms. First, to deliver to the Watchers their sentence. Then, to record what he saw in heaven, the secrets of the stars, the structure of creation, the judgment of angels, the destiny of the wicked, and the glory of the righteous. His visions were not fleeting dreams. They were revelations so vast, so complex, that he wrote hundreds of chapters describing what no human had seen before. He saw the foundations of the earth, the paths of the sun and moon, the hidden chambers where the winds were stored, and the mechanisms by which the stars obeyed divine law. He was shown the places where souls awaited judgment. He saw the abyss, the prisons of the watchers, and the faces of the archangels who stood guard over time itself. He saw the flood before it happened. He wept for humanity, and he wrote it all down, not for his generation, but for the last generation. This detail is crucial. The Book of Enoch repeatedly emphasizes that its wisdom is not for the people of his day. This book is for the distant generations, for those who will live in the time of tribulation. He was not just a prophet of the flood, he was a prophet of the end times. What happened in the days of the Nephilim, Enoch warned, would happen again, not with giants in flesh, but with spirits in power, not with visible angels, but with hidden rulers. The rebellion of the Watchers was a prelude. The final rebellion would be a mirror. In his writings, Enoch describes a great return of chaos, a time when knowledge would increase, but wisdom would vanish, when leaders would rule with lies, when men would worship power, when the earth would be polluted again, not with violence alone, but with blasphemy. The heavens would be shaken, the stars would fall, the blood of the righteous would cry out from the ground, and just as it had been in his day, judgment would descend from heaven. But Enoch also spoke of hope. He saw a throne of glory, set above the stars, where the Son of Man would sit. This figure, later revealed in Christian texts as Jesus Christ, would come in glory, not just to judge, but to restore. The wicked would fall, the spirits of the Nephilim would be cast into final darkness, and the righteous, the faithful remnant would inherit a world that could no longer be corrupted. A new creation, unmarred by rebellion, guided by divine law, sustained by peace. The legacy of Enoch is therefore twofold. He was both a witness and a scribe, a man caught between timelines. His message warned of the past, but burned for the future. The Book of Giants, though fragmented, shows how even the Nephilim feared Enoch's words. They knew what he said was true, and in their terror, they sent messengers to beg for mercy. But Enoch could not offer what heaven had already decided. Even now, scholars and seekers return to his texts, decoding ancient symbols, cross-referencing fragments from Qumran, Ethiopia, and Mesopotamia. They try to understand what Enoch saw. Some dismiss his writings as myth. Others claim they hold keys to prophecy yet fulfilled. But regardless of one's view, one truth remains. Enoch saw farther than any man before him, and what he saw shaped the destiny of the world. Enoch's life ended not with death, but with ascension. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. This mysterious phrase has sparked endless speculation. Was he transformed into an angelic being? Was he shown the final end of all things? Was he taken to preserve the knowledge he had gathered? Perhaps all are true, because in every age, when the world descends into chaos, his voice returns, not in thunder, but in parchment, in scrolls buried in caves, in warnings rediscovered. The prophecy of Enoch is not just about what was, but what will be. As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the coming of the Son of Man. This phrase, echoed by Jesus himself, ties the ancient flood to the future judgment. And if Enoch's vision is accurate, then we are not just reading history. We are staring into our own reflection. The pride, the rebellion, the forbidden knowledge, the spiritual decay, it has all returned. Yet so has the ark, not of wood, but of grace, a shelter not from water, but from wrath. Enoch's words point not only to destruction, but to deliverance. He saw the end so that others might choose a different path. He walked with God so that those who came after could know that walking with God is still possible, even in an age of giants. In the end, Enoch's legacy is not his visions, it is his walk. A life lived in alignment with the eternal, in a time of collapse. And that is the message for today. The giants may return in spirit. The Watcher's teachings may rise again. But those who walk with God, like Enoch, will always be taken above the storm. Thousands of years have passed since the flood buried the world in silence. The Nephilim are gone, their cities buried beneath oceans, their bones ground to dust. The Watchers remain in chains, bound beneath the earth, their names cursed and forgotten by most. Enoch's voice echoes faintly through ancient scrolls. Yet despite the passage of time, the story has not ended. In fact, according to Scripture, it has only paused. Because the words of Jesus contain a chilling prophecy, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be at the coming of the Son of Man. The past, it seems, is not finished with us. What were the days of Noah? Not merely days of violence, not only a time of war and sin. They were days of spiritual contamination when heaven and earth mingled in ways they were never meant to. Days of arrogance, where men dismissed the divine and followed only desire. Days of corrupted knowledge, forbidden unions, and godless pride. Days where giants ruled and man forgot how to kneel. And it is in those conditions, Jesus said, that the final judgment would come again. Look at the modern world. Technology advances faster than we can understand it. Machines learn to think. Genes are edited. Life is manipulated in laboratories. The stars are mapped. The earth is divided. Power is consolidated in fewer and fewer hands. There is knowledge more than ever before, but wisdom is scarce. Mankind plays God with tools we were never meant to wield. Artificial intelligence mimics human thought. Weapons can level cities in seconds. Voices rise, declaring, "There is no creator, we are the creators." These are not merely scientific breakthroughs. They are echoes, reflections of the forbidden knowledge once taught by the Watchers. And beyond technology lies spiritual erosion. The sacred is mocked. Holiness is outdated. Lust is glorified. Sorcery rebrands itself as empowerment. Occultism thrives in pop culture. Disguised as entertainment, tarot cards, crystals, channeling spirits all once condemned now circulate freely through digital altars and modern rituals. We live in an age where the door to the spirit world is again being propped open. Just as it was in the days before the flood, many speak of shadow governments, secret societies, and global agendas. While speculation abounds, one thing is certain. Throughout history, groups have always sought hidden knowledge, forbidden power, and control over mankind. These are the spiritual heirs of the Watchers, those who believe they can climb the heavens and remake the world in their own image. The giants may no longer walk in physical form, but their ideology walks proudly through the corridors of culture, media, education, and power. Enoch wrote for us, for the generation of the end. He saw our days. He saw the rise of corrupted knowledge. He saw the spirits of the Nephilim wandering again. He saw a world so flooded with noise that it no longer hears the warnings. In his time, the ark stood as a symbol of defiance against the coming flood. In our time, the ark is Christ, the only refuge from the judgment to come. But just as in Noah's day, the world laughs. Just as then, warnings are mocked. Just as then, the sky grows darker. We often ask, how could the people of Noah's generation ignore the ark? But do we not do the same? We see the signs. We read the words, yet we delay. We distract ourselves. We surround ourselves with giants not in height, but in influence: celebrities, leaders, false teachers who build towers of pride. We sacrifice our children not in fire, but on the altars of vanity and indulgence. We do not worship statues, but we worship fame, wealth, and the self. We are not different. We are the same. But just as the flood came suddenly, so too will the return of the Son of Man. Enoch saw it. Jesus warned of it. Revelation confirms it. There will be a moment, a final breaking point, when the heavens open once more. Not for rain, but for fire. Not for cleansing, but for culmination. The watchers will be judged. The spirits of the Nephilim cast into the abyss. The final rebellion crushed. And only those in the ark will remain. Not a vessel of wood, but a covenant of grace. The greatest danger of this age is not war or famine. It is forgetfulness. We have forgotten the flood. We have dismissed the giants. We have reduced Enoch to myth, reduced scripture to metaphor, and declared ourselves the authors of truth. And yet, even now, mercy waits. The door has not yet closed. The rain has not yet fallen. There is still time to listen, to return, to remember. Because if the days of Noah are here again, then so is the choice. Build the ark or drown beneath the waves. Of all the ancient texts lost to time, scattered in fragments across caves and deserts, few are as haunting, as raw, or as relevant as the Book of Giants. Though incomplete, though torn and buried, its voice remains a voice that echoes not only through history, but into the future. Its power lies not merely in what it records, but in why it was hidden, and why it refuses to die. For the story of the giants is not just about the past, it is a mirror, held up to every generation that dares to forget. The Book of Giants offers no comfortable endings. It begins with awe, descends into terror, and ends in silence. No heroes emerge victorious. No gods come to comfort. The giants drown. The watchers are chained. The earth is scrubbed clean. And yet, beneath its weight is a thread of divine justice. Harsh, but fair. Terrible, but necessary. In a world unraveling by rebellion, judgment was not only an answer, it was the cure. So why does this book matter now? In an age of science, reason, and skepticism. Because even in its fragmented form, it speaks to the timeless human struggle, the hunger for power. Many Kama, one, Munda, 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 the seduction of forbidden knowledge, the blindness of pride, and the consequences of forgetting who we are. It is a warning not just to ancient peoples, but to us, those who build towers into the heavens while ignoring the cracks beneath their feet. The giants were not just tall men. They were the embodiment of humanity, untethered might without morality, knowledge without wisdom, desire without restraint. They were the future we still flirt with today. In their hunger, we see our greed. In their fall, our arrogance. In their extinction, our potential end. The flood was not just water, it was consequence made visible. The Book of Giants matters because it reminds us that not all knowledge is neutral, that there are doors which, once opened, cannot be shut. That rebellion often disguises itself as progress. That evil, when unchecked, grows until even heaven must act. And perhaps most chilling of all, it teaches us that when the warning finally comes, it may already be too late. And yet, even amid its darkness, the text holds glimmers of light. In Enoch's obedience, in Noah's resilience, in the covenant that followed the flood. These flickers of faith remind us that judgment is never God's first move, it is his last. The flood came after centuries of patience. The giants were warned. The watchers were petitioned. Humanity had time. Time to repent. Time to turn. But the sands ran out. The door was sealed. And the waters rose. And so, it is not a tale of vengeance. It is a chronicle of what happens when mercy is ignored. In our age, the Book of Giants returns not through scripture but through story, through symbols, through shattered tablets and ancient scrolls once buried and now unearthed. It reminds us that some truths are too large to remain buried. That spiritual memory does not die, it only waits. And as we open its pages, we are not only reading about the past, we are rehearsing a warning for the present. The giants no longer walk among us, but their spirit does. In our obsession with strength, in the idols we craft, in the sciences we bend, in the voices that whisper, we can be as gods. We may not call them Nephilim anymore, but we build their image every time we exalt self over Creator. And every time we ignore the ancient warnings, we step closer to a judgment not of water but of fire. The Book of Giants teaches us to fear rightly, not with panic, but with awe. It teaches us to remember, to heed, to look at history not as myth, but as mirror. It tells us that the spiritual realm is not distant, that angels fall, that knowledge corrupts, that flesh can birth abominations, and that in the end, only those who walk with God will stand. Perhaps that is why the book was hidden for so long. Perhaps heaven knew that it would speak louder in a time like ours, when giants rise again, not in form, but in spirit, when men play God and gods are mocked, when the ark is forgotten, and the flood is no longer feared. But the pages have returned. The warning is clear. The mirror has been held up. And now, as in the days of Enoch, the choice is ours.